From the far reaches of the Milky Way galaxy, it's Retro Nerd Girl with a film review for you. Today, I'll be reviewing the movie Total Recall, released in 1990, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sharon Stone, and Michael Ironside. Directed by Paul Verhoeven. The synopsis is: the temptation of implanting a vacation to the planet Mars unearths a series of events that changes the simple life of a construction worker in 2084. The story. The film is based on the short story We Can Remember It For You Wholesale by American writer Philip K. Dick, first published in 1966 in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. Douglas Quayle has an office job in the not-too-distant future as he dreams of visiting Mars in 2198. He goes to Recall Incorporated, where he tries to get memory implants of traveling to Mars. While under sedation, Quayle regains erased memories of being a secret agent who has been to Mars. What a fascinating premise! It was first optioned in 1974, and scripts for the project made the rounds in Hollywood. Ronald Shusett and Dan O'Bannon worked on the screenplay, but the budget for the film would be too expensive and too special effects heavy to pull it off realistically. They abandoned the idea to make Alien in 1979. However, Dino De Laurentiis bought the film rights and tried to get the project off the ground twice in the 80s. Arnold Schwarzenegger read the script, fell in love with the premise, and wanted to play Quayle. But Dino thought he would be a better fit for a movie like Conan the Barbarian, and Jeff Bridges or Richard Dreyfuss would star in Total Recall. Maybe the timing was all wrong, but luck was on Arnold's side because this iteration of the project never saw the light of day. Dino hired David Cronenberg, who reimagined the character of Quayle a bit more athletic, so he considered William Hurt for the role, but then had Patrick Swayze lined up to star in the film. David also wanted to introduce a few more changes. However, Dino De Laurentiis was not willing to stray too far from the original written material. What survived the script was David's addition of the community of Martian mutants and their leader, Kuato. Eventually, David Cronenberg left the project to make The Fly in 1986. Patrick Swayze was still attached to the film, with Bruce Beresford as director when it went into pre-production in Australia. When De Laurentiis ran into money troubles and went bankrupt, that shut down this iteration. But it sent Arnold Schwarzenegger into high gear to snag the movie for himself. After becoming a household name for the Terminator and the Predator, he had more clout in the industry and a proven track record to lead blockbusters. As an actor with marketability in Hollywood, he built a lot of trust and a lot of important relationships. He convinced Carolco Pictures, after working on Red Heat with them, to purchase the rights to Total Recall, with the stipulation that he had the part of Quayle and could choose a director and had the creative control over the film, script, production, and even elements of distribution. After seeing RoboCop and at one time being considered for the project, Arnold really enjoyed what Paul Verhoeven did with it and brought him on board in the autumn of 1988. By the time Paul saw the screenplay, over 40 drafts of it had already been written. He then brought in Gary Goldman to put the final touches onto the script. One big change was the name of the protagonist from Quayle to Quaid. It's not absolutely certain why, but it was assumed that this was to disassociate with Dan Quayle, who was the United States Vice President at the time. Another big change was conceived by Arnold, who thought up having the character to work in construction instead of being an accountant, which made it more believable that he could play the part. As well, Paul wanted the film to emphasize the science fiction aspects more and set the events far enough into the future for the audience to believe. One of the more brilliant aspects of the script is how infectiously quotable it is. The result is one of my very favorite science fiction films that send the viewer through a non-stop thrilling adventure. Once the film is over, you may find yourself questioning whether or not the events are all in Quaid's mind, or did it happen to him for real? Now the pacing. At 1 hour and 53 minutes, it's nearly 2 hours long. That's a long time, but I hardly felt it at all because the pacing just keeps moving so fast and the story itself is so interesting. It's incredible. And usually my harshest critique about most films is about pacing, but I find this one to be so perfectly paced for what it is. Now the challenge. There are several challenges in the film. And the main challenge is if you believe that the events in the film is an implanted memory or a real one. But before we get into that, let's act as if this is all real and start from there. Mars Administrator Velos Cohagen hatches up a plan with his favorite right-hand man, Secret Agent Carl Hauser, to snuff out a psychic resistance leader by the name of Kuato, who is interfering with the extraction of turbinium ore being mined on Mars. In order to get the trust of the resistance freedom fighters, Hauser dampens his identity and another one is imposed on top of it. Hauser becomes Douglas Quaid, a construction worker who lives a very normal life. His wife Lori and his co-worker Harry are agents assigned to watch his every move and make sure he doesn't stray away from their plan. Doug is bait for the resistance because Hauser's knowledge of ancient Martian technology is deep within Quaid's mind. He was, quote-unquote, the perfect mole to lead Cohagen right to Kuato. The only hitch to the plan was that Quaid was not supposed to get activated when he did. His decision to go and get a vacation memory implant, quote-unquote, popped his memory cap and set off certain protocols for the agents watching him to attack. Velos Cohagen is one of my favorite villains because he looks like a normal guy. You can have drinks with this guy, but actually, no, you can't have drinks with this guy. He's totally manipulative, threatening, cold-blooded, and downright mean. He's also extremely talkative with lots of monologues to tell you a little bit more about what's going on in his sick mind. Oh gosh, I love that guy. Now his left-hand man is Richter, who is one of my all-time favorite henchmen. Now there's a rumor that Gary Goldman gave him the name Richter because he wrote a screenplay with David Z. Weinstein for Big Trouble in Little China that was released in 1986. And W.D. Richter was brought in as a script doctor, which caused bad blood between the two. Now I refer to Richter as Cohagen's left-hand man because he's not his favorite. Hauser is his favorite, so he's always belittling Richter because he looks at Richter as just a brute henchman. He's not even willing to share any information with him and expects him to simply do as he's told. What I love about Richter is that he's not just your average meathead henchman that just likes having an outlet for his anger. We learn that Lori Quaid is actually his girlfriend, or possibly his wife. This proves that he has been about as tolerant and disciplined as he possibly could be watching her with another man and possibly in danger every single day for 6 weeks. Remember, this whole thing was Hauser's idea, and he probably suggested that Lori be his wife just to piss Richter off. The whole thing is starting to look like a horrible tragedy for Lori and Richter. So when he is chasing after Quaid, he's chasing after Hauser, and that reveals so much more about his actions in the film. And I love that he was giving such a juicy storyline. And this is why he's been trying to kill Quaid once Hauser's cover was blown. This whole situation could have been diffused after Quaid was sent home in the Johnny cab, because he truly doesn't remember anything. When Cohagen tells Richter that he wants Quaid back in place with Lori, Richter pretends that he's losing his communication signal. He'll do anything to keep Lori from having to pretend to be Quaid's wife any longer. Lori is indeed capable of handling herself. Lori is a savage opponent when she wants to be. She can be cutthroat and manipulative, but I feel like she's just doing her job as best as she can. She has the double disappointment of Richter and Cohagen if she doesn't do a good job. But if you think about it, in this society, if Cohagen tells you to pretend to be a man's wife, you don't really have a choice. However, there are a few moments where Lori is alone, and you can see a glimmer of honest vulnerability. If you ask me, she got a really crappy deal out of this whole event. This all circles back to Cohagen because every last one of his henchmen are expendable to him except Hauser. He fights like hell to get his quote-unquote best friend, Hauser, back. And he couldn't make the decision to kill Quaid until he realized that he couldn't get Hauser back. Like a petulant child, he kicks his fish tank and watches his fish die because they need water to breathe. And this is shadowing the thing that he wants to control, which is air, the air on Mars, and it also shadows his ultimate demise. And I just love that these bad guys had so many layers, and it was thought through in this film in such clever ways. There aren't too many layers to the mutant double agent, Benny. He gains Quaid's trust as a plucky but conveniently always available cabbie. What's really striking about him is that he has amazing one-liners and always claims to have 5 kids to feed, bringing some comedy to an otherwise dark theme. 4 unforgettable villains in one film is a lot, but in the case of Total Recall, it works so well to keep the action going without betraying the story. Before I move on, I wanted to highlight the fact that the planet itself is a challenge, a killer of sorts. The monopoly of air, one of life's most basic human needs. It's primal and it's desperate, giving us yet another layer to the tension in the mix of all of this. Now my empathy. The empathy is so strong in this. Right from the beginning, when we see Quaid is a man who is stuck in a life that he doesn't want to live. A lot of people can completely identify with this on some level and may even feel like this right now. It's a terrible feeling to have a lot of things that people think you should be grateful for, and you feel deep down that you were meant for something more. Within Quaid's deepest fantasies, he wants to be important, and this is the reason why he took the job as the secret agent when he was Hauser. This is explained more in the short story by Philip K. Dick, and this is why he is offered the ego trip when he goes to Recall Incorporated. After being shut down several times by his wife Lori from taking a real trip to Mars, a simple memory implant of a trip sounds like the perfect option. One of the most important scenes in the film is the scene in the recall center, because everything that happens in the film is predicted right here. So let's get into the nerdy details of this scene. At Recall, the salesman was going to give him a standard vacation, but then he upsells Quaid on a special ego trip package where he can be someone else. He tempts him with options, and the one that appeals to Quaid is to be a secret agent. The salesman details the experience to come of being a top operative under deep cover with people trying to kill him left and right. This actually happens in the film right after he leaves Recall. His co-worker Harry and his wife Lori try to kill him for what seems to be no reason at all. Quaid has Hauser's incredible tactical fighting and survival skills, so when he gets pushed into a corner, he unleashes cold-blooded secret agent tactics that will make you shudder. He is brutal, and he doesn't blink an eye to kill anyone or use a shooting victim as a bullet shield. I mean, oh, that is so cold. Now, you would think that this would make the character completely unlikable, but strangely enough, there's something so innocent about Quaid. He spends most of the film not sure of what's happening and being a victim of this sort of mind heist. At one point, I was afraid he was actually going to kill Lori at their apartment, and I think he didn't do it because he had some kind of sentiment for her. It also makes you realize that he's only defending himself in most cases, and he's not a cold-blooded killer, until sometimes he is. When he discovers that he's actually Hauser undercover, he goes with the program instead of hiding out on Earth, because he's actually thriving on the excitement that he could be more than just Douglas Quaid. For Quaid, this is a chance of a lifetime to live out his dream and be what he considers to be quote-unquote important, hence the ego trip. I thought that was brilliant. In the lab, the doctor shows him pictures of the alien artifacts, and we learn that they are part of a reactor to create air on Mars. The doctor passes a disc to her assistant, and he says, "That's a new one, blue sky on Mars." The salesman at Recall tells him that in his ego trip, he'll get to meet a beautiful girl. As well, the doctor asks him in detail what he likes in a woman and pretty much describes the woman that he has been having dreams of. While he's dozing off, the mannequin on screen changes to the face of his dream woman, which could mean that we're actually seeing things from his point of view at the moment. He's filling in the blanks of what this woman looks like from memory of the dream, or maybe even haven't actually met her on Mars as Hauser. If she is truly a construct of the program that they are using, it may be tapping into his own memories to get that exact girl. The technology may be that advanced enough to do it. And I like the fact that this technology isn't explained to death in the story. It leaves a lot of blank areas so you can fill them in with your imagination. What I love about this movie is that in another movie that would be considered a big goof or even a dreaded plot hole. And I love the ambiguity of not knowing if the girl was a construct of the program or of his memory. The rest of the story is so solid that this detail mattered based on how you interpreted what you saw, but it doesn't unravel the movie. On Mars, Quaid gets a note from Hauser telling him to find Melina, who is, as Quaid describes at Recall, a brunette, athletic, sleazy, and demure. She used to be Hauser's girlfriend, but Hauser was just using her to get close to Kawato. Hauser! We could get a complete prequel movie or a TV series just about Hauser, and I would be on cloud 9. After Melina reports back to Kawato that Hauser's memory has been wiped, the Resistance then trusts that Quaid can reveal answers about the secrets he holds that could give them the upper hand in the war against Cohagen. The relationship between Melina and Quaid doesn't really have a lot of time to develop, except for the fact that we know that Quaid has been dreaming about her. There's already a built-in fascination about her for Quaid, and I do believe that they have great chemistry together, and I really enjoyed seeing the two of them on screen. Once they became a team, I can see that they were actually moving in sync with one another, and I love that. That unity that they had, kind of moving from one place to the next in unison. Now, there is a point in the film where everything we think we know about the film gets turned on its head. Dr. Edgemar, who runs Recall Incorporated, shows up at Quaid's hotel room and tells him that he is actually not on Mars, but still on Earth, experiencing a schizoid embolism at the Recall Center. What? Absolutely incredible. I remember seeing this for the first time and my mind was completely blown. Like, what is going on? Is this true, or is this, is it not true? Who's lying to him? What's going on here? I just love Doug's response to this too. He just laughs it off. It's like, if we're not on Mars, where are we, But Dr. Edgemar really plays it off seriously. So that's when you wonder, just for one moment, what if all of this really is happening in Quaid's mind? Dr. Edgemar details everything that has happened and everything that will happen in the story. Some of this you really don't get until your first rewatch of the movie. Dr. Edgemar asks Quaid to take a red pill as an act of compliance to gently bring him out of his delusion. Know of any other movies that came out about 9 years later that asked the protagonist to wake up from a fake reality by taking a red pill? Yes, The Matrix! One of my favorite movies, and one day I'll get to review. And like The Matrix, Total Recall represents the idea that reality may have multiple levels of perception. Now, just to let you know, I didn't come up with that connection. It's a concept that has been floating around the internet for years. If Quaid doesn't take the red pill, the events of the ego trip program will leave him lobotomized by the end of the movie. What I love about this threat is that it's casually mentioned in the beginning of the film that there had been a few people who had been lobotomized from the procedure. I love how this subtle story scheme comes full circle. The salesman at Recall tells him that he will kill the bad guys and save the planet, which actually happens, leaving audiences to wonder if poor Quaid is actually lobotomized by the end, as Dr. Edgemar claimed. Another argument from astute audience members is that this must not be a dream because there are scenes in the film taken out of Quaid's perspective, like most of the scenes with Cohagen in his office. Now, to counter that argument, the scenes outside of Quaid's perspective are still scenes in the ego trip program. The characters have to run through their sequences to function organically within the program, much like the Matrix. Quaid is experiencing his perspective of the program, but we, the audience, is experiencing the program in its entirety. However, there is a strong possibility, again, that all of the events are actually real, and the description of the ego trip program, Blue Sky on Mars, just so happens to be a lot of interesting and curious coincidences. Either way, this experience is real to Douglas Quaid, and he has to live with the reality that he has killed his wife, his co-worker, and two very prominent figures in society, not to mention the 20 to 30 other people he's violently killed along the way. He's either going to go to jail or he's getting a promotion from the agency. Now, the technical aspects. The production decided to film in Mexico City because of its sleek architecture called New Brutalism. It was futuristic looking at the time. The crew was there for 6 months, and it was really tough on the crew because nearly every one of them got food poisoning from the water except for Arnold Schwarzenegger and Ronald Shusett. Schwarzenegger had his food shipped from the U.S. after his experience in Mexico during the production of Predator, released in 1987. Shusett brushed his teeth with boiled or bottled water and got a weekly shot of vitamin B12. Paul Verhoeven got so sick to the point that paramedics would administer fluids and medication between takes. Now, this film contains a strong amount of product placement, and I know that's a big problem for a lot of people, but I personally don't mind it so much because we have products all around us in reality. I also like the fact that some of the product placement was already inlaid within Mexico City, such as those found in the subway station for Fujifilm and Coca-Cola, and some people say that those signs are still up there to this day. I love the visual style of the film, which translate over the set design on Earth, which was very gray and sterile, angular, and lots of concrete was used. I thought it was more realistic than many of the other shiny, sleek versions of the future I've seen. It's not pretty, and it was actually an extension of the world being so practical, but also boring and unexciting. It reveals a lot about the way Quaid sees that world. On Mars, we had those wonderful miniatures of landscapes, which were based on real photographs of Mars. Production designer Will Sandell researched ways in which humans would live on other worlds and went from there to inspire buildings and other sets to represent Mars. The sets on Mars were given a very steel appearance to indicate that these were man-made. There were even moments where you could see some of the exposed Martian rock, and red gravel were splayed on the floors. I loved it, and it felt so very organic. As well, the differences between the two planets don't end there. Coke is exclusively promoted on Earth, and Pepsi was exclusively promoted on Mars. It's an interesting detail, but one nonetheless. Paul Verhoeven ran into some disputes with special effects supervisor Rob Bottin during the making of RoboCop in 1987. But after the success of that film, Verhoeven gave Bottin freedom to go wild with his creativity, and that he did. His ooey gooey and trippy mutant makeup effects were incredible and helped to make the film visually unique for all time. Just one look at these mutants and many odd, unusual effects, you know instantly what movie this is from. There is no mistaking it, and that is why I think this elevates the impact of the film. And even places where things weren't so realistic, you felt like you could touch them, that they really existed in the space. Kuato was especially a standout as actor Marshall Bell had a full bodysuit cast made up for his role as Kuato and his twin. The name Kuato is from the Spanish word Kuwait, twin. Kuato was an animatronic puppet controlled by 15 puppeteers. It was incredible. And again, 100% unique. Had never seen that before in another film. One effect that was astounding, terrifying, and something that the audience could not unsee was when Cohagen, Quaid, and Molina were exposed to Martian air and were suffering from explosive decompression. Detailed puppets were made of the upper half of Arnold Schwarzenegger, Rachel Ticotin, and Ronnie Cox without arms. Their faces were articulated to extend their faces, eyes, and tongues. Stunt hands were then added to create more desperation as puppets writhed to expand in morbid ways. Molina and Quaid somehow survived this by oxygen being dispersed in the nick of time to reverse the process. It's a moment in the film that really works if you believe that this is a simulation running in Quaid's mind. If you believe that it's real, it doesn't work, because surely there would have been some injuries from what they experienced, and that's something to think about. Not every visual held up over time, but I assure you it was the very best of its time, earning Eric Brevig, Rob Bottin, Tim McGovern, and Alex Funke a Special Achievement Award for Visual Effects on Total Recall at the 63rd Academy Awards. It looked amazing in 1990, and I can tell you firsthand, it truly wowed and astonished. And who could forget the head within the head separating and reforming into a talking bomb? It was really awesome seeing that for the first time. Now, with so much practical effects in this film, there was a small amount of CGI in it for the scenes involving the X-ray scanner in the subway station. CGI was still in its very early stages, but it was used in a believable way on screen. There were some motion caption filmed for the scene where Quaid walked through the X-ray machine with a gun and had to jump through the digital screen. However, the software used to animate the sequence didn't work, and at that point, animation had to be done the old-fashioned way, by hand, frame by frame. It's often hard to imagine what technology will look like in the future, but the film brought us so many fun gadgets like the hologram watch, the hologram tennis lessons. I had so much fun watching those elements in action, and I'm crossing my fingers we actually get to have some of those future tech devices in real life. One other part of the visual style provided on Mars was the red aesthetic, which gave the scenes a very subliminal sense of a menacing dread, danger, and urgency. The late great American composer and conductor Jerry Goldsmith, most known for his work in film and television scoring, composed the score. He said that he modeled it after the score from Conan the Barbarian, released in 1982. And you can hear that with the use of big horns and dreamy strings. There's a part of it with a thriving beat to it, like the Terminator score as well. So it feels like a big, epic Arnold film score. At the same time, there's a wonderful, otherworldly tone provided by flutes that permeates throughout, feeling mystical, dreamy, suspenseful, and grandiose. Performances. The cast in this was phenomenal. Each actor is giving their all, playing these characters with intensity and dedication. As I told you before, 41-year-old actor Arnold Schwarzenegger spearheaded the project, and there's a sense that everything in this film was creatively tailored for him as a result. His acting in the film is not exactly groundbreaking, but he played Hauser and Quaid with a serious intensity that felt so very authentic, immersing the audience deeper into the fantasy of the film and really honed in on Arnold's acting strengths. After having seen the film, I can't imagine anyone else playing the role. As well, he was so instrumental in making sure the film had every chance of being its best. Laurie was portrayed incredibly by Sharon Stone, who was not only excellent at playing the many emotions of her character, but underwent a physical transformation, learning Taekwondo and gained muscles. Arnold Schwarzenegger dubbed her the female Terminator during filming. As a result, she was inducted into the Stuntwomen Association as an honorary member and landed a role in Paul Verhoeven's next movie, Basic Instinct, released in 1992. She also posed nude for Playboy magazine in conjunction with the movie. Kurtwood Smith, the actor who played Clarence Boddicker in RoboCop, released in 1987, was asked to play Richter, but turned down the role, citing that the characters were too similar and even had the same actor playing his boss. Canadian voice, film, and television actor Michael Ironside was chosen to play Richter, and I can't tell you how much I loved him in this. He has a tendency for playing villains, and I think one of the reasons would be because of his scar on his upper left cheek, and that was due to walking into a glass door when he was younger. That's not just it. It's not just the physical look that he has. He delivers so much soul into the character with his voice and his priceless facial expressions. With Richter's backstory, you can see so much of it is in his performance, and he believes in his reasons for all of his actions. This is just one of those memorable performances for a henchman that overachieves. Now, the enjoyment. Paul Verhoeven is known for delivering visceral gore in a lot of his films, and this film is no exception. I don't typically like a lot of gore and violence, but somehow the way it's portrayed in the film, it's not glamorized, but in a way it kind of is exploited in a way. There are no beautiful poetic deaths in this movie. It's all horrible, shocking, brutal, and very unapologetic. Originally, the film was given an X rating by the MPAA, and it had to be creatively edited to tame down some of the more gruesome scenes, such as the escalator shootout. And to be honest, I just can't imagine that scene was any more gruesome than it already was. And then there was Benny's last scene, the death of Richter's right-hand man, the scene where Quaid escapes a group of ninja scientists, pretty much. Those guys were insane. And Richter's last scene in the movie. After all the special edits to get an R rating and 16 years in the making, Total Recall became the second most expensive film in history, next to Rambo in 1988. Now it was time for the trailer, but there was a problem. Arnold Schwarzenegger saw it and felt that what they had really wouldn't gain interest for the film. So then he took matters into his own hands and sat down with producers Peter Guber and John Peters. And he managed to get Guber to get in touch with the company that did trailers for movies like Empire Strikes Back and The Terminator, which translated into a jump from 43% of public awareness to 99% of public awareness. What a feat! It went on to become a hit and left an indelible impact on pop culture. It was also included among the 1001 movies you must see before you die, edited by Steven Schneider. It was no surprise that the sequel was soon in the works, with Arnold Schwarzenegger to return as Quaid. The working title was Total Recall 2: The Minority Report, which would reveal that Total Recall was not a dream, and Quaid would work with psychics from Mars to solve crimes. 5 years of fruitless development made it very clear that this version would not see the light of day. But eventually the script became the movie Minority Report, released in 2002. Total Recall was eventually remade in 2012. Total Recall may have influenced the line "Clever Girl" that we hear in Jurassic Park, released in 1993. Quaid says that to Laurie when he notices that she's stalling him while Richter and his men make their way through his apartment building. It just could be a curious coincidence, but I noticed that. I believe that after Total Recall, the science fiction action thriller became a blockbuster mainstay. It not only influenced nearly every action film in the 1990s, but paved the way for them to be funded. The pacing was also one of the key factors in this. It was action-packed. Every action film after this really revved up to 1,000. We have movies like Universal Soldier in 1992, Demolition Man in 1993, Time Cop in 1994, Speed in 1994, The Fifth Element in 1997, and The Matrix in 1999. There's even a scene in The Fifth Element where the secretary is changing her nail polish, just like the receptionist at Recall does in this film. Now, of course, there were amazing action movies with fantastic pacing before this, like The Terminator, released in 1984, Aliens in 1986, the James Bond, Star Wars, and Indiana Jones franchise films. However, this brought something different to the genre, a play on reality. Each audience member comes away with their own perception of the conclusion. I think of it as a beautiful gift because we get to be part of the story as the film fades to white before the credits. Was it real or was it all a dream? My rating is a 9.8. Well, that sums up my review. I hoped you liked it, and if you did, I've got over 100 of these videos, so go on and browse the channel and see more reviews from me like this. I've got amazing links in the description, so go on ahead and check them out. Subscribe if you haven't done so already, and hit the bell icon to be the very first to be notified of my next video. This is Retro Nerd Girl signing off. Take care, movie lovers. I'm off to my next review.